Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to today's Asia-Pacific Stats Café on Big Data Partnership Models. My name is Rike Hansen, and I'm currently in charge of ESCAP Statistics Division, and it's my pleasure to see so many tuned in to the session we have today. Now, this is the second Stats Café in 2 weeks where we actually look at issues surrounding the increased uptake by national statistical offices of big data. The first café we had 2 weeks ago was on big data governance issues. I found that we had a really good discussion with some excellent input from our resource speakers. Today we are going to focus on partnership models, and we are again looking at a topic that really surrounds the uptake of big data and is one of the topics that we are hearing from many statistical offices when they do try to engage with organizations that are holding big data. The issue of what kind of partnership arrangements can one really do becomes one of the large questions in the upstart phase. This is an issue already when statistical offices are trying to get hold of some big data to do some experimentation on, but not least when we start looking for ways of regularizing the use of big data in our statistical operations. This issue of partnership models become front and center to the efforts. How can we make partnerships last so that the kind of data we may have this year is something we can, with reasonable expectation that we also have access to next year and the following, so that it can really become part of the regular operations in our statistical office. The issue of big data is an issue that has been highlighted by the chief statisticians in Asia and the Pacific as a topic that most of them are very interested in, and all of them are struggling with in one way or the other. And there was very sound support last time the chief statisticians got together to discuss pertinent issues in Asia and the Pacific, to really put big data as one of the top priorities also for regional collaboration going forward. And part of these efforts is a big data strategy that we have been working on in the statistics division, and today's Stats Café, as well as the one we organized 2 weeks ago, are part of the implementation of this strategy. So we have about an hour and a half for the session today. We'll be talking about different big data partnership models, both looking at partnerships with government agencies, with the private sector. We'll be hearing about some of the issues surrounding these partnerships, and we'll hear about issues such as legal arrangements, possible needed adjustments, data privacy issues, data exchange issues, and hopefully we'll also be able, through some mutual reflection, to look at, what could win-win models really look like? What could models be where all the partners in these kind of arrangements really get out of it with something they didn't have before? This is one of the core criteria for partnerships to be successful. We have a very good lineup of speakers today. We'll be hearing both from BPS Indonesia, from Presidium, from Telkomsel. We'll hear from Geostat. We'll hear from the Global Partnership on Sustainable Development Data. And I'm very well helped, as usual, by my colleagues and today's moderator and facilitator, who will also give a proper introduction to our speakers, is Ms. Irina Bernal, who's been leading the research work in ESCAP Statistics Division during the past now a year and a half, I think, something like that, Irina. And without further introduction and ado, Irina, the show is yours. So please.
Great. Thank you very much, Rike, for the introduction. Greetings, everyone. It is my great pleasure to moderate this Stats Cafe today. And as Rike mentioned, indeed, we have many questions and issues on the table today to address by an excellent panels of speakers. Although today's session, today's examples and presentations focus on accessing mobile phone data through partnership with mobile network operators, they could serve as a basis for understanding various partnership models that could be applied to other big data. Before we proceed to the presentations, a little bit of housekeeping. This meeting is conducted on MS Teams and is being recorded. The recording will be shared on our page so that you can go back to the examples and the Q&A. We would appreciate if all of you could keep your microphone on mute. Also, if you have bandwidth issues, please turn off your video. And lastly, on the right-hand side of the screen, there is a meeting chat. And we encourage you to share your questions there, and we'll address them during the Q&A session. Now let's move to our presentations. Our first presenter is from Indonesia, and we managed to bring together all three partners for this exciting project. We have speakers from BPS Statistics Indonesia, Telkomsel, and Positio. And our first speaker is Titi Lestari, who is Director of Finance, Information Technology, and Tourism Statistics at BPS Statistics Indonesia. Titi is responsible for managing data collection, processing, and analysis of finance, information technology, and tourism statistics. Titi is also a member of multiple international working groups, including the UN Global Working Group on Big Data and its task teams on mobile phone data and AIS. Titi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for people in US. So I will share my presentation. My presentation today is about the partnership between public and private entities in Indonesia regarding the data access of mobile phone data. So as you may know, we already use mobile phone data since 2016 for inbound to official tourism statistics. So the reason at the time is because mobile phone data, we believe that it can increase coverage, reducing work burden for our staff at the border, because we already have kind of like 248 survey, and also reducing respondent burden and reducing budget or cost, because our survey it's costs quite a lot at the border. Before we use mobile phone, we use a cross-border survey, or IMF call it subtle trade survey, and also we use a household survey before mobile phone data. So the triggers is also user need for more granular data, especially for SDGs. For SDGs, the government need the granular data up to a municipality or cities area. And also in 2000 12, the General Assembly, the book that the word that counts, that also trigger us how to use big data, especially mobile phone data. And the UNSC meeting, this is a statistical meeting in 2014. At the time, the UNSC said that NSO should embrace big data other than data source. So since then, mobile phone is used for official tourism statistics. So we release every month. The first time we release is quite challenging because we know that journalists, public will ask. Actually, we are a bit. Because we need the trust from the public, also from the journalists, whether this data can be used as a indicator for tourism statistic or replacing the survey that we conduct. So the first time we release, we explain about the methodology and also why we use the data. Actually, mobile phone data is already used in many countries, but mostly I think for research or data statistics. For official statistics, the important thing is the quality assurance of the data, because how we encounter or uh, how we encounter the bias or noises in the data, and how we make it inference if the data is undercovered or something like that. And also the methodology, because in the world there is many methodologies about mobile phone data, but not much that used for official statistics. For research, that will be okay, because that's a research conducted by students or researcher. But for official statistics, we have to gain trust from the public, whether the methodology can be used and then can represent the reality in the data. And also the privacy process. At the moment, we didn't have the law or the act on the PDP, Privacy Data Act. Yeah, Privacy Data Act. We didn't have that yet, still in the parliament. So when processing the data, this one is necessary. So in that, then we have mobile MOU to access the mobile phone data. The MOU is with the telecom, which is the parent company of the Telkomsel, that to gain the data access, and then annual contract, because Telkomsel already kind of like invest a lot the infrastructure to store the data, because we ask the signaling data. The data is quite big, or quite huge in a year. And also for methodology and methodology development, we have MOU with Possessium. So why is Telkomsel? Because Telkomsel has the biggest market, around 60% nationally, which is a different market share in different area. But in the rural and also in the border is more than 90%, sometimes even 100% market share at the border. And also they already ready to store the signaling data. We asked signaling data because that better capture the mobility. And they also has resource. They invest in infrastructure and human to get to store the signaling data. and to do the processing. And with Positium, which is the company in Estonia, when we first search, we know there is many methodology and also many company that doing the process of mobile phone data. But then during the discussion with the UN, we found out that only one country that use mobile phone data for official statistic, that is Estonia. And also we read about the feasibility study that conducted by Eurostat in that in 2016 or 2014. And another thing, Position also know the NSO business process. They know about the quality assurance framework published by UN, and also the GSBBM published by UN. So then also this is the only company that work with mobile phone data for official statistics, because for official statistics is different with, as I mentioned before, different with research. We have to gain trust and also transparent with the public. And also the member of UN CEBD, that's a big data expert, and also primarily it said that UN Global Working Group on Big Data. So thank you. That's all my presentation.
Great. Thank you very much, Titi, for providing a brief overview of this project with the two private companies. This project, of course, would have not been possible if the telecom operator did not share their data with the BPS Statistics Indonesia. And it is a great pleasure for us to have Mrs. Mia Melinda, the Vice President of Data Solutions at Telkomsel, who is responsible for leveraging Telkomsel data assets for the benefits beyond telco. Bumia is currently leading Telkomsel M site as a new growth engine for Telkomsel, which is a startup mindset business that focuses on the use of Telkomsel rich audiences for various insights to grow businesses. Bumia has been also influential in supporting government programs using telco data and bringing digital advertising and lending to a different level. Unfortunately, Bumia will have to leave us in 10 minutes. So I encourage participants that have questions specifically for Bumia to write them in the chat, and we'll address one or two questions right after her presentation. And the remaining questions to other participants will address during the Q&A session. Now I would like to invite Bumia to deliver her presentation.
Thank you, Irina. Good day, good morning, and good afternoon for everyone. It's nice to be here. So I'm representing Telkomsel. Telkomsel is the market leader in Indonesia in terms of mobile telecommunications. As Telkomsel is one of the largest populated country in the world, so we also manage to serve more than 170 million of subscribers, which is one of the tops in the world in terms of numbers.
Bumia, apologies for interrupting. We hear some background noise. I just wanted to check if that's your microphone that is moving and causing this noise. Because when you don't move, we don't hear it. So if you could please fix your microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, let me turn off my email. I think so. Yes, it was me. Sorry for that. So if we go to the first slide, yeah, in terms of us as a telco, this is our telco subscribers number, and then as you know, Indonesia having almost 70% of internet penetration, where more than 90% of them are mobile. So our mobile internet users is also quite a lot, more than 100 million. And compared with the other telco, we are quite advanced, which in terms of the numbers of network element, which is in network in telco, you will see that this is translated into a number of BTS. So go to the next slide, please. So in terms of yeah, sorry, I think the noise is coming from the text in the Teams.
No, maybe you could just hold your microphone so that it doesn't move.
Okay, how about now?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So as Bu Titi has mentioned, as a telco, we start to see the data that we collect from our subscribers into something that becoming a different asset that telco has, right? So we structured our data into various features. We segmented into demographic and consumers' habit. We call it a customer 360 features. Yeah. So you can see that we can we do structure the data in terms of the locations, the city, the hometown, the buildings. We also do some proxies from their demographic, like age and gender, and also from their spending pattern towards the use of our telco services, like how much is their recharge denominations, how big is the use of their digital package, their price plan, and so on. Right. In terms of the use of our mobile broadband, it's giving more of data and understanding on customer lifestyles, from the way they browse, the kind of website or apps that they use to watch a video, listening to music and social media, that kind of stuff. And also we also create some kind of segmentations to label whether where is their home, their work, their places of hangouts, and whether they are traveler or not, based on their mobility patterns. So we enable this by as Bu Titi mentioned, this is something that we look at quite seriously. We invest in a big data platform. I think our Hadoop cluster is one of the biggest in Asia Pacific, and our in terms of the talent, we also nurtured talents. This is something that is different from our role as a telco. So we do a lot of things like engaging data science and new talent, also having a data science academy inside the company to groom the capability to manage this data. And with this, we start to experiment in using our data beyond telco use cases. Yeah, so of course we use our data to make sure our engagement with our customers is always be there, to make sure that we offer them a personalized offer. But we also see that there is a responsibility also to help the grow the other businesses by maximizing the use of our data. So I will explain this a bit further into the next slide, please. Next slide, please, Debbie. Yeah, we categorize the kind of use cases that currently we do into three parts, right? The first one, we call it a risk insight, whereby using our telco data, we are trying to help Indonesia with its financial inclusions, giving a risk assessment using the proxy of the customer's spending in our service, right? So we create a kind of a telco credit scoring, and currently it's already being used in several banks, multi-finance, and fintech. The next one is the way we help our nations to grow the digital services using also insights from telco data. So this is helping the digital players to understand their market competitions using telco data, also to create a better segmentations, and lastly also to create a better and personalized offer based on their telco insights. The next one is the one that we will discuss more details today, which is the mobility insights, right? So this is more into the use cases that it apply is more to help the public services, the likes of BPS. We also work with tourism ministry. We helped the Asian Games 2 years ago using our mobility insights crafted for making some decision making or monitoring based on the mobility pattern of our customers. We also have a B2B arrangement with others entity beyond public services for this matter, like the likes of retailers or banks, to ensure that their investments in a kind of a location related initiative, whether it's advertising location based or establishment of office to at a certain locations, we help them to make decisions on that. So I think there are a lot of possibilities of the use of telco data, and we are continuously improving and finding the best way on how to make use of this. The next slide will be pretty much to detail down the partnership that we have with official statistics. I think I will not repeat what Bu Titi already mentioned before. So I think we are here to become an alternative, a more modern ways of collecting data, faster, more accurate, more timely, and having a broader coverage observation area in compare with doing it in a conventional ways through asking questions through a survey. Yeah. So yeah, our partnership has started back then in 2016, right? We started off with help the official statistics with the inbound tourism monitoring. This is specifically for the cross borders area, and then we add on to also monitor the domestic tourism. This is where Indonesians go to the Indonesian sites inside the country, and we are the one we will help the statistical officials to monitor the numbers of the domestic tourism. And then we add on also more use cases to monitor the outbound tourism, Indonesians that go outside, how big is it, and then ask them questions through a digital survey for a very specific persons based on these insights. So yeah, I think in principle, what we want to say here is that this is the output of this engagement will be in the form of an aggregated insights, meaning there is no PII, personal identifiable informations that is exposed, right? In the event that there will be an individual data to be accessed from our database, we will require a consent from the relevant subscribers. And then in terms of how we come up with the metrics, as Bu Titi said, they need to be very careful. They need to have the buy-in from the journalists, from the related party. So we collaborate with BPS in developing the methodology. We will only productize the methodology as when BPS is giving their approval. And to enable the development on the methodology, we do the R&D process in a sandbox, right? So we create an environment with a samples of subscribers data with all MSISDN hashed, and only for this, we only provide the features as per the scope and the deliverables as agreed between BPS, right? And then BPS from that sandbox will develop the scripts, and we will be the one from the sandbox to productionalize it into our backend environment and make the adjustment in the script to ensure that it's a workable productizations to our 170 million subscribers. So, and then we provide the report as per the needed format. Yeah, I think that's a glance on the way our B2B collaborations with official statistics. Thank you, Irina. Back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Bumia, for this very interesting overview on the data that Telkomsel collects and the partnership that you have with the NSO. I have a quick question for you if you have 1 more minute with us. There is no doubt that telecom operators have a wealth of data, and Indonesia is one of the very few successful examples in our region of the telecom operator sharing data with the NSO. My question is, what is in there for the Telkomsel behind this partnership? Is it purely commercial interest, or you go beyond a commercial arrangement with the NSO? And is there an advice, or what advice could you give to other national statistical offices in our region that are trying to figure out how to approach the national telecom operators? How should they adopt a strategy, or how should they approach the telecom operators so that they are willing to share their data following maybe a similar model that Telkomsel has developed with BPS? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Irina, for the questions. Yeah, anyway, my team will be here, Irina. If there is in the end of the session there are questions related to Telkomsel, I think they will be happy to take that. Yeah, to answer your questions, I think as you see, right, in terms of the use of data, we are not only working with public services like BPS. Yeah, we work with various verticals. We do this in a B2B arrangement. Yeah, I think that's currently how it works, a B2B arrangement. We haven't find yet which actually we also open to take it to more strategic collaborations, right? But there will be some discussion need to be made on what will be the strategic trade-off that us as a telco and the government will do in terms of finding a win-win solutions for both of us in providing what is needed for the nation. Yeah, but currently it's a B2B arrangement. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Bumia, for your excellent presentation. We understand that you have to leave us now, but we hope that your colleagues could participate in the following discussion. Thank you. And now we're moving to the third presenter, Sim Esko, who leads the international business development at Positium and works mainly with large public sector institutions across Asia, Africa, and South America to leverage location data from mobile networks. Positium has been analyzing big data from mobile network operators for 10 years and turns mobile positioning data into statistics for population, mobility, and tourism. Thank you, Sim, for being here with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irina. So is my voice okay? Do you hear me well? Yes, I'm often asked how we cooperate with statistical offices around the world. And here, I don't need to repeat the points of the previous speakers who we partner with in Indonesia. So I'll just go and first start with where Positium works. So Positium is not an Indonesian company, but actually an Estonian company. And we work globally with statistical offices and ministries and government entities and mobile network operators around the world. Some of the national statistical offices have been very brave and taken very good strides in the use of mobile position data, and they come from very different environments and very different cultural backgrounds. They have one thing in common, and they work with us on unlocking mobile phone data for official statistics. And I'm mentioning here Indonesia, BPS, in Oman, we work with the National Center for Statistics and Information. In Estonia, Statistics Estonia and the Bank of Estonia, who are both statistical providers, national statistical providers. And then there is a myriad of countries where pilots have been tested and run, and all of these countries on the map, I would say that they still have the dream of one day running continuous mobile phone data projects for statistics. Why they haven't done so, it's a longer question. So let's focus on the task at hand. Then there are international organizations like ESCAP, United Nations Statistics Division, and then there's the GSMA from the mobile operator side, ITU, Eurostat, OECD. They are all for more use of big data, responsible use of data for official statistics, and they see a future where this is possible and try to guide us in a way that works internationally, and we can keep to our standards of official statistics while doing so. So a very often asked question, why does Positium cooperate with national statistical offices out of all the different organizations we could work with? And there are many reasons why not to cooperate with them, which is usually people say that but statistical offices, they're slow to take up innovation, slow to move. They still work with surveys that were established decades ago. They're rigid, they're bureaucratic, they're not very apt to change, and they never have budget. So why would you cooperate with them? But the story is more nuanced than that. There are many reasons why we should see more big data used in national statistical offices, because NSOs are also seen as the go-to organization for producing statistics that is needed for government decision-making. They are kind of the single source for truth in many cases. They are the ones that should tell you what is the right level of statistics being produced. They are deeply focused on quality, which is why they work well. Is they don't do anything half-heartedly. This is also probably why it takes a bit longer to change, but we like that because that leads to very interesting discussions on methodologies and quality processes that are key to making big data work, because big data is not collected for the purpose of statistics. It does need to have a very extensive quality process in place, and NSOs know that this is the case. And because NSOs are the independent data stewards of many different data sets, they are actually specially positioned also to access data of private companies, for example, telcos. And in many countries, the legislation, the Statistical Act, already allows big data to be accessed by the NSO for statistical purposes. And GDPR, for example, General Data Protection Regulation, is a point in case that it actually allows you to collect for statistical purposes also personal identifiable information if need be, if it's minimized, and if proper precautions are taken. So statistical offices do have some leeway there. And then now the question is, so if we see all these strengths of NSOs, then how do we make this partnership work? And for us, when we look at the general statistical business process model of producing statistics, then I believe the answer lies in having everybody do what they do best. So the example of PPS, the National Statistical Office, they're the ones who are specifying the needs of users. They are designing the outputs and variables designing how to weigh and aggregate the data, how to evaluate, disseminate, and analyze the data that comes out. Then Positium is the one that uses the experience that we gained from across the world to process, to do the design of the process and the collection and frame, and build all this processing so that it can be used for quality statistics, and then to make it very safe for privacy preserving techniques, so that identifiable information does not go around and make rounds. Telecom cell or mobile network operator is the one that is actually running the collection and producing the variables. So everybody has their own piece of the work to do, and they're doing what they do best. So in summary, Positium as a company, and I believe that national statistical offices can be the perfect data steward for mobile phone data, mobile positioning data. But there are, of course, some downsides to working with NSOs. So if we can make NSOs more innovative and flexible, create these routines where they can innovate, then they'll also receive the funding they deserve. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Sim, for this wonderful presentation, and especially for highlighting the positives of collaborating with the NSO, and also for visualizing where each partner fits into this tripartite collaboration between BPS, Positium, and Telkomsel. So now we've seen the partnership model in Indonesia, where the NSO has direct access to the telecom operators' insights. And now we're moving to the second model, where the NSO partners with the regulator to access the telecom operators' data. Now, for this next presentation, I would like to invite Mariana Yalagonia, who is Chief Specialist at the Population Census and Demographic Statistics Department at Geostat, to share Geostat's experience in partnering with the regulator for the Big Data project. Mariana, the floor is yours.
Hope that you can.
We can hear you with some interruptions. You're on mute now.
Just I'm trying to.
It's working now. Yes, it's working.
Okay. Good. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, your presentation is up.
Okay. Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to present on this topic, big data for official statistics and data partnership models, focusing namely on Georgia. My name is Mariana, and I'm Chief Specialist at the Population Census and Demographic Statistics Department. I'm working at the National Statistics Office of Georgia, Geostat. I'd like to briefly start with the introduction and talk from the perspective of NSO. In our case, the main source of migration at NSO Geostat is for international migration administrative data, which is provided by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. This is border cross data. And as for population census, it's the source for internal migration. Although here we have some challenges, some data gaps, as some other countries could also have, we are not possible to estimate population by sex and age at the municipality or regional level as well. on the annual basis. And we do not have migrants by country of origin and destination for international migration. And also question here is timeliness in terms of internal migration, because as you know, usually censuses are conducted once per 10 years. And if we would have more frequent data, it would be good. So in terms of it, MPD, mobile positioning data, which is big data, would help us. So let's go now directly, let's proceed to our collaboration part and works performed in the field of human mobility. NSO Geostat cooperated with, as you can see here on the figure, with UNSD UNDESA. We had several meetings and workshops starting from 2019. We're a member of the UN Global Working Group working on big data for official statistics, and currently we're finalizing our work on the handbook on the use of mobile phone data for official statistics, and NSO Geostat is a lead of the subgroup of the direction of migration statistics, and also a member of the subgroup of tourism statistics. As for the ITU here, in the past, there was a pilot project on the use of big data from the telecom industry, and there were 6 countries, Colombia, Georgia, Kenya, Philippines, Sweden, and the United Arab Emirates participating in the project. Data has been accessed through either type of A or type of B partnership, which we will now shortly see on the next slide. So as you can see here are 2 data processing models. First type of partnership model is when MNOs do not want to share, so to say, the data. In this model, MNOs or telecommunication operators process the data and come up with the aggregated indicators for regulator or NSO. And second option implies the transfer of the raw data from MNO datasets to regulators' data cloud or the infrastructure of National Statistics Office, which would have necessary tools and skills to process and analyze these data. And as you can see on the table left-hand side, Georgia has partnership type number B. Now let's get back to the slide and go to the cooperation with GNCC, our Communications Commission, shortly called also as COMCOM, which is regulator. So in frames of this cooperation, also several meetings has been held with their representatives starting from 2019. And first working version of the methodology, some draft ideas has been sent to the GNCC for further pilot processing of the data in 2019. And GNCC conducted pilot processing of the data, roamers and non-roamers data using call detail records, CDR, from from MNOs, and also IPDR, Internet Protocol Detail Record data events for assessing tourism and migration. And they presented preliminary results on the platform in the interactive format for us for Geostat. Here on this slide, you can see it in more details, what exactly they presented. So platform provided the user with the visualized data outputs and possibility of filtering out the data according to the different variables. And the following data was available, as you can see listed: distribution of the number of roamers on the territory of Georgia, the number of visits, etc. Due to time constraint, I would not hold on this slide for a long time, and I will go to more important aspects of the collaboration. So here, now let's highlight those aspects. First of all, as we can see, first bullet is IT infrastructure, and we should mention that there is a lack of adequate infrastructure in Comcom. The second thing is data access, and in case of Georgia, regulator is an intermediary in between telecom operators and NSO due to some regulations. And although Geostat is covered by the law of on official statistics of Georgia, as shortly also mentioned in the previous meetings, this law obligates organizations and institutions to provide data to Geostat necessary for statistical purposes, although it does not say anything specifically about CDR. So there is such a constraint that regulator cannot share data with third parties. And as you can see on the figure below, MNO, as we can see here as well, do not directly transfer data to NSO, but rather through a regulator. So it transfers data, plots data to the GNCC storage. So for some countries, it might be challenge or limitation because in this case, it's difficult to ensure continuous data access. So access sustainability would be under the question. But also we should remember, as shortly mentioned in the previous slide, NSO should have then enough sufficient skills and infrastructure to store the data and to process this data. And also we should of course mention such point as pandemic. I believe face-to-face meetings are still quite important in terms of collaboration, even in today's world of modern technology. As we all know, in the context of pandemic, it's not recommended to organize non-virtual meetings with several participants, so remote working might also affect efficiency of collaboration. And we should, of course, highlight that, unfortunately, since the project is temporarily on the hold, the draft methodology that we have could not be tested on the real data, and we do not have access to the platform mentioned before anymore. So now let's shortly review what would push us forward. Now, this is that if Geostat would have the possibility still to test the methodology on real data, even let's say with some small part of the databases, and assess migration and tourism as the next step. Along with that, active participation in the international meetings, which we already have been doing and plan to do so in the future as well, I think it would be quite helpful and beneficial for us. So now, if time allows, we could then shortly, I would draw your attention to the very brief analysis comparison of traditional and new alternative sources for migration and tourism. As we know, data sources are, as a rule, censuses, survey, administrative data, and population registers in some country. In Georgia, unfortunately, we do not have population register, but some countries might have. And limitation of new data sources here are such as data access, coverage of people. For example, census covers the whole resident population, right? And in this case, we have lower coverage of people, of course, in case of new data sources. And mobile positioning data might include some noise and erroneous records, and special skills and infrastructure are needed. But there are more advantages, as we see. In terms of timeliness, it would raise usage of new data sources, would raise frequency of data collection. We would have then more data points. As for the access to statistical information previously not available, yeah, we would have new indicators. Also calibration opportunities for existing data, and space and timely resolution, so scale level of detail in a set of data would raise. Also, another advantage is accuracy and relatively low cost. We know that censuses are quite costly, and granularity, we would then have more granular data. We could obtain more granular data, and modern technologies would be supplementary rather than substitution of the traditional data sources, which would raise the quality of the data and help to produce new indicators, if in the nutshell. And in case of migration statistics, for example, in particular, yes, it could not be replacement, but in some cases it can be both replacement or complementary, for example, in tourism statistics. And now the final part. Our expectations are that big data could fill the current data gaps, and we would then have a distribution of population by sex and age at the municipality and regional level on the annual basis. And in terms of internal migration, we would then have internal migration not once per 10 years, but on the annual basis. And we would obtain, we would be able to calculate new indicators, receive to have more disaggregation in the international migration, as well as in the tourism statistics. I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and please don't hesitate in case of any further questions or comments. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you so much, Mariana, for showcasing another model, partnership model, where the regulator plays the role of the intermediary between the telecom operator and the NSO. Unfortunately, we did not manage to secure the presence of GNCC to share their insight on the collaboration with the NSO, but we hear a lot of a need and interest from the NSOs in collaborating with the regulators, especially when the regulators are the ones collecting the data, and then there is another set of regulation that actually limits what the regulators can further share down. So this intermediation adds another level of complexity, and you also mentioned the challenge of infrastructure not only of the telecom operator, but also of the regulator who intermediates this data exchange. So now that we've heard from two NSOs on different approaches to big data partnerships, such as through direct interaction and partnership with the telecom operator and with the national regulator, we'll hear from the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data on the emerging models, trends, and consideration for public-private data sharing partnerships. Our next presenter is Martina Barbero, who works as policy manager for the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. Martina focuses on advancing GPS DD policy work concerning the public use of privately held data, and works in particular on data sharing partnerships and governance models for private-public data sharing. Prior to this, Martina worked as a senior consultant with Deloitte Public Sector Strategy Team, assisting the European Commission in the adoption and implementation of data strategies. Martina, thank you for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Irina, and let me just share my screen. I hope you will see the presentation. If you don't, just let me know, but I think you should be seeing it. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I hope that my presentation, after these two very nice presentations that are around specific cases, can help us to take a step back and look a bit more horizontally at what's going on across different geographies in terms of statistical offices having access to MNO's data. So what I would like to do in the next 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll try to keep it short so we have time for discussion, very quick introduction on who we are as the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, just to explain you where we're coming from, and then what are we focusing on in terms of work for concerning NSO's access to mobile network operators data. And then based on our work across different geographies, I will explain in a second, I tried to extract some messages in terms of the emerging partnership models. And also I will venture into speculating about the future scenarios. Hopefully you will allow me to do that, and I'm happy to discuss them further afterwards. And finally, based on all these elements, a few considerations in terms of conclusions and what will need to happen next to increase NSO's access to MNO's data. Very briefly about me, no need to spend time on this because Irina already introduced my profile, but I'm working at the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, specifically on data governance and access to privately held data, and assisting with the establishment of public-private partnerships. Many of you, some of you might already know GPSDD. For those who don't, and just to give you a background about what I will present next, my organization is a network of over 280 partners that come from many different stakeholders categories, so government, civil society, private sector. We have a lot of statistical offices that are part of our network, academia, foundations. All these partners, they share the common objective of harnessing the data revolution for sustainable development. My organization tries to build bridges and also broker partnerships between these stakeholders. The idea is that we work mostly with national authorities, whether NSOs or other national authorities who have a need in terms of data, and we try to match and fill that need by leveraging this network of organizations that we have. So in that respect, we help broker public-private partnerships when statistical offices or other public agencies ask us to build partnerships with private sector for accessing to big data. We try to collaborate in the establishment of such partnerships. Not spending too much time on that, you can visit our website. I can link. I can post the link to the website later in the chat. So because our organization is an organization that works across geographies, we have a lot of work in Africa and Latin, a bit less so in Asia and the Pacific region. But because we work across different geographies and different countries, we have come across the need of, going more in depth into what does it take to have sustainable partnership for the use of privately held data. This is a topic that we came across quite a lot in the last few years. So we started to organize our activities to respond to that need. What I would like to say as a caveat here is that in my presentation, I will focus quite a lot on access to mobile network operators data. Because this is the area in which we are the most advanced, but in reality, we also work on access to privately held data from in other use cases. For instance, access to data from retailers for producing consumer price indexes, or access to geospatial information or satellite information that are held by the private sector. So the work on MNO's data that I will present is not our only focus, but at the moment is the one that is emerging as the most hot topic. So that's why the presentation specifically goes in depth on that. What happened in the past few years is that when we realized that there was a serious need to have a conversation about how to establish public-private partnerships around access to mobile network operators data, we started by trying to learn and understand what was going on in the field in different countries. So in 2020, we held a virtual learning series that was focusing on the existing operational and governance models for public-private partnerships around MNO's data. The idea of this learning series was to put MNOs and NSOs in the same room and to allow them to understand each other and identify the barriers for them to collaborate and develop a number of recommendations. The final paper that we released after this virtual learning series is available by clicking on the link in the presentation, and I think should be made available to you. Based on this virtual learning, we realized that there is a need to strengthen governance support for public-private data sharing. In fact, one of the learning series was that technical issues and infrastructural issues are very important, but what NSOs feel they are less confident with is more the operational and governance understanding of how these partnerships should work. So what we're doing at the moment is we have a project funded by the Hewlett Foundation. This concretely supporting Statistic Botswana and the Uruguay National Statistical Office to get access to the data from their national mobile network operators. So really concrete help that we are offering them. But we're also organizing a number of activities in the form of peer exchanges that are about discussing sustainable business models and access to mobile network operators' data on the long term. And I will share a few insights from these activities. In parallel, we're also launching an advocacy campaign, which is called the Data Values Project. And under this advocacy campaign, we're trying to understand the mobile network operators' perspective a bit better and try to get what's their input into how do sustainable public-private partnership look like from mobile network operators' perspective? What are the key ingredients from their perspective? Just to include that in our advocacy so that we can support better our public partners. And finally, and I can spend a bit more time on that if you want later, we're following on the policy work and what's going on in terms of access to privately held data worldwide. I'm sure you know that the European Commission is working on a new EU Data Act, which focuses also on provision on what they call business to government data sharing. So they're contemplating making it compulsory for a certain number of use cases in certain circumstances and with certain safeguards. So they launched a public consultation on the EU Data Act, which is still open as we speak, and they're trying to understand and gauge what's the feeling of stakeholders around making business to government data sharing obligatory in certain cases. Also, the European Commission, the Council and the Parliament are negotiating the update of the e-privacy regulation, which focuses on regulating data for mobile network communication and public networks. And under the new e-privacy regulation, which is still to be adopted, so under discussion, there is a section about access to metadata of the MNOs by statistical offices. And that could facilitate, actually, if the regulation is adopted as suggested right now by the Council, that could facilitate statistical offices' access to the metadata. Finally, of course, the European Commission is working on access to new data sources for official statistics, and they recently established a working group. So there is a number of legislative developments that we're also monitoring and trying to follow up on those to reflect about the implication that such model would have on other geographies. So very briefly, and well, that's the bulk actually of the presentation, but I will try to go through that as shortly as possible. What are the emerging models that we're seeing, and what are some of the possible scenarios in terms of the type of partnerships that will be privileged in the future? In the past few years, a lot of what happened in terms of statistical offices having access to mobile network operators' data was happening under philanthropic or pro bono initiatives. So most often, especially in countries from the global south, there was really like corporate social responsibility strategy of the MNO or a pro bono initiative funded by international donors that was supporting statistical office access to the MNO's data. This was also strengthened by the COVID crisis because with the pandemic, we saw a lot of these initiatives also again pro bono proliferating around the world. But in parallel to this philanthropic approach, there are other models of partnerships that are emerging. Commercial models in which the public sector and NSOs are paying either full access, either full price or preferential prices to access the services of the MNOs. We're seeing that in Europe in particular, Spain, for instance, as one of such commercial model, but there are other commercial models around the world, even in the Pacific, in the Asia and Pacific areas. Another model that is emerging and on which we're working is what we call the reciprocity model. Basically, here is to say that there is no financial transaction involved, but the MNO gets something in return from sharing the data with the NSO. And what the MNO gets in return really depends on what the MNO's needs. For instance, in Uruguay, where we're working, MNOs are, experiencing a very an increase in the competitiveness of their market, and they struggle with getting good market data and analyzing their market's share. So one of the options for the reciprocity there is that when MNOs share the data with the NSO in exchange produce some market statistics that are fed back to the MNOs. And that's very interesting for them. Also, the NSO offered to train the MNOs in using geospatial data. So there are some exchanges. There's an exchange that happens in which the NSO is not only the recipient of data, but also the provider of services to the MNO, which basically compensate for the lack of financial remuneration for the data and services of the MNO. And finally, as mentioned earlier, in the European Union, but also elsewhere, there are some legislative developments and countries thinking about making compulsory for MNO to share data with the statistical office or the public sector more widely in specific circumstances. What we see in terms of which models are applied where, it depends on a number of criteria. So far, humanitarian models have been preeminently philanthropic based, because the humanitarian models are about response to major catastrophes and they're once only, while the other models are more for long-term cooperation and sustained access to data. The sensitivity of the data also lends to consideration about the model of partnerships. For instance, data from retailers on prices is not as sensitive as data from MNOs, and therefore retailers are sometimes more keen to share those data for free. Of course, the length of the sharing agreement is super important. If you want a one-off exercise done, then you can, of course, try to get the data for free by the MNO. But if there is a sustained effort for the MNO over time to provide the NSO with the data, some type of compensation, either in a reciprocity way or commercial model, might need to be discussed. And finally, very importantly, MNOs around the world, and we have seen it with the presentation from Telecom Cell, are actually starting to sell their data and services to the private sector. And in many cases, they've built platforms to do that. So what happens in certain countries is that MNOs are basically extending the offering of the platform to the public sector, in which case they expect in general to have a commercial model in place, because if the private sector pays for access to the platform, then the public sector should also pay. So let's go into the speculative future scenario. This is totally speculative and this is just to foster the discussion. But let's assume that there is more voluntary data sharing by the private sector that will happen in the next few years. There is no more voluntary data sharing by private sector. So if the MNOs don't voluntarily start to think about sharing data more, there might be a risk of having more and more binding regulation and legislation put in place because of the frustration that the public sector might feel in not getting access to those valuable sources of data. Of course, if you put in place legislation, there are really important questions that arise in terms of proportionality and data protection. We will discuss them in a second. If, on the other hand, MNOs start to share data even more frequently with the public sector and the NSOs, then what needs to happen probably, and what will happen next, is that NSOs will embark more and more in discussion around partnerships model, around incentives for data sharing, about long-term strategies and business models. So there will be a need to increase capacity on the NSOs and public sector side to have such type of complicated conversation with the MNOs. And if more and more MNOs start to sell the data to the private sector and build their own platforms, probably there will be an increased expectation towards the public sector as well to use those platforms and to consider, MNOs will consider the public sector as one type of client, but they will expect some commercial model to be applied to the public sector as they apply to the private sector. So very quickly, what's next? It is a matter of fact that the private sector now holds sometimes better and more data than the public sector. So that we will see an increased use of privately held data and MNOs data in the future. But we need to train the statistical offices in particular and public sector more generally around the questions of business, operational and governance models, and also about which model exists for establishing long-term partnerships, because the public sector needs to be able to have those conversations, which are some of the toughest conversations sometimes. What would also help, and what we'll try to do, is to develop a menu of options for existing business and operational models, just to give to the public sector the possibility to choose one or another, depending on the context, on the requirements, on the particular circumstances. And then as GPSTD, we will assist to more and more legislation be put in place obliging MNOs and private sector to share data, then there will be a need to engage much more in discussions around proportionality and protection of citizens' data. Proportionality meaning that potentially every type of privately held information is interesting from a statistical or public sector perspective, but we cannot expect private sector to share the entirety of the data sets with the public sector. So there will need to be some lines that are drawn around what are the really essential data sets for the public sector and which are nice to have. And protection of citizens' data, something that was also mentioned in previous presentation. We have seen with COVID that citizens don't always trust their government using, for instance, telco data for tracking mobility patterns. So if regulations are put in place that oblige MNOs to share data for statistical purposes or policy purposes with the public sector, we need to take into account citizens' concern and making sure that citizens are heard and their concerns are not dismissed. So this is everything I wanted to present, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion right now and questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Martina, for such an interesting presentation and for sharing particularly the insights on the emerging models for data sharing, mentioning that we're moving away, diversifying away from pro bono data sharing into 3 models that you highlighted: commercial models, reciprocity models, and through government legislation, and also providing some thought-provoking questions that we all as a statistical community should consider. We've already started to have a heated discussion in the chat box on how we should approach the partnerships with the private sector. Should it be a mutually beneficial collaboration? And if so, you've already, Martina, provided us with an example in Uruguay, how the telecom operator benefits from sharing its data with the NSO, or should we go through the legal framework path? And if we do, how should we call it and how should we approach it? We have 12 minutes left until the end of this session, and I have 3 questions to our speakers to address the questions that have been mentioned in the chat. So, Simon, Martina, since you've been working at the global level with the NSOs and telecom operators, and we've seen these several models of data sharing, what is the most predominant approach chosen by governments and NSOs for collaborating with the private sector? We've seen 2 models today, one where the NSO works directly, partners directly with the mobile operator, and the second one where there is the regulator as intermediary. Based on your experience with countries around the world, what is the more predominant approach, if any? Sim, Martina?
I'm happy to go first. I mean, I have a feeling from what I saw in our work that the regulator is always involved in the discussion, whatever model apply, but that at least in the countries in which we work, NSOs tend to have direct access to the data or work with other intermediaries, like technical providers, to get access to the data. But having the regulator as the channel through which the data comes through the NSO, I think I've seen it a bit more rarely, but I'm happy to be contradicted by others, of course.
Thank you. Sim?
Oh yes, I can contradict. So it depends on the country and the environment and how much teeth do the telecom regulators have, because sometimes they like to play it close to the chest and not give away anything that might infringe on their territory. In Indonesia, well, the regulator was not even involved, I would say, but they found out later that this kind of partnership happens, and if there is a amicable agreement between the government and the private sector, how the data sharing should happen, then, well, it can be done just by following the existing laws. But then again, there's a good example of ITU project, which Mariana talked about, and we were also involved there, where in just 1 year, starting from zero, we got access to data from 5 countries. One of them was Georgia, which was well ahead. And in many cases, the approach from the ITU and telecom regulator was crucial, actually, in getting the data. Now, well, there's also the question, what is a more sustainable business model? If the telecom regulator is always there in between, is that sustainable, or do we need to have a more direct access? And I think sustainability comes from having a wider range of partners involved, and that everybody plays their own part, as I already mentioned as well. So it's not as simple as if you give the statistical office state access, then everything will work out. And there have been cases where it hasn't worked out and things are stuck in pilot phase, although they have access to raw data.
Martina,
sorry, if I can react to that. No, I agree. It really depends on the country. What I wanted to say is that from the experience we have, the regulator is always informed, and notably in most countries, there's a letter of support or a letter of commitment from the telco regulator, and in most cases also from the data protection authority, if existing, because that helps a lot for the statistical office to gain the trust of the mobile network operators. So even when the regulator is not the channel for the data, the regulator needs to have a seat at the table and be able to comment on the initiative, and of course being involved and support that facilitates the negotiation for the partnerships quite a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
so
and oftentimes,
sorry.
So Irina, oftentimes
go ahead.
mobile operators themselves say, we'd love to share data, but we're not going to do it voluntarily. Please request data from us. And then the question is, who can request this data? Is it the National Statistical Office, or is it the regulator who's supposed to hand in that request? So there's more to the mandatory side, but actually for mobile operators, it's also easier if there's an official request, and it kind of releases them of the burden to a certain extent.
So based on what you're saying, we're seeing that countries are developing their own approaches to accessing data depending on the national legal framework and their interaction with the private sector. So there is indeed no one size fit all, no one approach that could work with all. And since we're still at the beginning of the way exploring big data partnerships, so it's good to have different models to learn from them, but every country, every NSO should be aware of their national legal frameworks and constraints. Sim mentioned the question of sustainability, business model sustainability, and if Deborah from Telkomsel could briefly share with us the business model behind Telkomsel. Is this partnership profitable, or is it just part of the corporate social responsibility? Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. So basically, as Mia have mentioned, that Telkomsel has a great muscle, right? So we are the biggest telco in Southeast Asia. We have 160 million subscribers right now, and also we have a large network antenna around Indonesia. We have 200,000 network antenna spread cover the Indonesian area. So to maintain that, we need a big cost of maintaining. The first is the storage, right? And also we need maintaining the storage and also the memory of our data, because we know that the data comes in a second is 1 terabyte per second. So it's a big data, right? It's a large amount of data. So basically, right now, the partnership model is the existing partnership model with our NSO. Here, BPS is the B2B partnership model, Irina. So I think that covers all of the costs that have to be maintained, the data and also the storage.
Great, thank you so much for this clarification, Deborah. We only have 4 minutes left until the end of the session, and I would still like to address the last question to Titi and Mariana, the issue of trust. How did your respective NSOs manage to communicate with public, general public, and explain to them how their data is used in the process of making statistics, particularly the mobile phone data? Was there any communication with the citizens? Have you received any resistance from the public?
Yes, thank you, Irina. Actually, the first time we actually BPS has kind of like a website, and also we have a workshop for the journalists. So journalists is kind of like our town. I mean, yeah, they explain. So the first time we use the new data source or new methodology, then we mentioned in our in my presentation, in that press release, if there is something new in the methodology and also a new data source, then we explain to the journalists, and then they write in the news. And we have kind of like before COVID, we have workshop for the journalists. So explain our methodology, and yeah, something like that. And then also we have the statistic forum. Statistic forum. They also explain. They help us like explaining to their students and their community about methodology or something like that. So far, when we first is no rejection, since we mentioned about the limitation of the data and something like that, about the inference and about the statistics, yeah, why we use, yeah, we explain all. Thank you.
Thank you, Titi. Mariana, would you like to add something?
Actually, could you please repeat shortly the question? Because from time to time I have some problems with headphones still, sorry.
Sure, no problem. The question was, how did you have any citizen concerns on the use of personal data from the mobile network operator in this project? Was there any resistance for using this particular data source for statistics?
I would say that we would not have, we did not have any experience, so to say, in this field, because as we mentioned, the data from telecom operators is directly transferred to GNCC, and GNCC temporarily provided us with the data, so we did not have any access to the personal data.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, we're running out of time. This was a very interesting topic with a very interesting discussion and many questions asked by the participants. We'll ask our speakers to respond to the remaining questions from our participants. And I would like to thank everybody for your active participation, and especially the speakers for their wonderful presentations, and the UN ESCAP team that supported the organization of the session. The next Stats Café is on new guidelines on CRVS inequality assessments next week. And now I would like to thank you for your attention and turn over to Ricky for closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Irina, for taking us through this session, and thanks for all the excellent presentations, and also to all of you who were very actively engaged in the chat throughout the cafe. both with questions, but it also sort of got its own life, I think, during this hour and a half. And what I just want to conclude, I've just put sort of 3 things here. I mean, one thing is, well, we see different partnership models emerging. We've seen different types of them. We heard about different types of them. There seemed to be agreement, and I definitely personally agree that it's not a matter of picking one and saying this is the one we should all use. It all depends on the context. But what we can say is that there is a general move from experimental partnerships and sort of some pro bono arrangements into something that is more formal agreements and also with a larger duration. The second point is that when we talk about increased uptake of big data and partnerships, well, we do have some strengths and weaknesses in the NSOs, and we saw different ways of addressing these. One of the things is this agility, the ability to move into new areas. And what I sort of saw from the presentations is, well, we can talk a lot about a number of capacities relating to managing new data, and some of them, but probably not all of them, needs to be built within the statistical offices. It's perfectly possible to outsource some of these aspects. We see that in Indonesia, for example. But one capacity statistical offices do need to have is the ability to discuss and negotiate partnership models. On the plus side, we saw, again, it's highlighted often that statistical offices are very good when it comes to looking at sustainable solutions, quality assurance. They're serious actors. They know how to deal with privacy issues. And this is something that is also appreciated from the rest of society. And it links, of course, to the many issues that came up on credibility, trust, etc. And that was where there was also a lot of chat exchanges. But from the chat exchange, I'll just pick up one thing, and that was this issue of, well, are we talking about a legal framework that needs to be in place first, then we can start making sure we can get access to the data, and then we can talk partnership models. And I don't think we ended with a conclusion in the chat here on this, but probably that this is a bit of an iterative process. It may be possible without a legal basis to do experiments. They may be very, very effective in advocating for some longer-term legal adjustments that can also facilitate long-term partnership arrangements and models. So those are my concluding remarks, and I know I don't manage to capture the whole thing. I think it's been extremely rich considering that we've just had 90 minutes. So more is definitely to come. And thank you to all of you for being with us as participants, presenters, facilitator and moderator, and do have an enjoyable rest of the day or a good night's sleep, and see you, all of you, to the Stats Cafe next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.